this Kunal Kamra, many of you may have heard of him. He is a YouTuber and a stand-up comedian who gave stand-up comedy in Bombay, and in that he made poked some fun at the former Chief Minister, Mr. Shinde, and also some fun at some industrialists and the Prime Minister, etc. Now, that is absolutely permissible under our constitution, in our freedom of speech. We can certainly have a comedy and poke some fun at political leaders, at various other people. Where he had given this stand-up comedy, threatened to kill him, and various FIRs, etc., have been registered against him, though it is absolutely not a crime. Absolutely under no law is it a crime to poke fun in a stand-up comedy against politicians, etc. FIRs have been registered, he has been summoned, and so on and so forth. So this is just one recent example of what is happening. We have seen so many cases of mob lynching, especially of Muslims in this country. The various civic rights of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of protest, freedom of travel, freedom of profession, etc., and the right to life and liberty. And to protect these rights, the Constitution created several institutions. The most important one is, of course, the judiciary, which was tasked with the responsibility of protecting fundamental rights and indeed protecting our Constitution itself, protecting our democracy also. And then there were various other institutions like the Election Commission, the Comptroller and Auditor General. And though the media is not mentioned in the Constitution, but it was assumed that freedom of speech would mean a free and robust media in the country. It also created a parliament which was supposed to act as a check on the executive. So, if we see what has happened to our country, especially in the last 10 years, what we are seeing is a almost rampant bulldozing of our fundamental rights, of all the institutions which were created to protect those rights and protect democracy itself, and indeed of the Constitution and the rule of law. However you look at it, you are seeing, to give you the most recent example, this Kunal Kamra, many of you may have heard of him. He is a YouTuber and a stand-up comedian who gave stand-up comedy in Bombay, and in that he made poked some fun at the former Chief Minister, Mr. Shinde, and also some fun at some industrialists and the Prime Minister, etc. Now, that is absolutely permissible under our Constitution, in our freedom of speech. We can certainly have a comedy and poke some fun at political leaders, at various other people. And yet, not only did a mob which was supported fully by the state government there in Maharashtra, fully supported by them, went and ransacked the place where he had given the stand-up comedy, threatened to kill him, and various FIRs, etc., have been registered against him, though it is absolutely not a crime. Absolutely under no law is it a crime to poke fun in a stand-up comedy against politicians, etc. FIRs have been registered, he has been summoned, and so on and so forth. So this is just one recent example of what is happening. We have seen so many cases of mob lynching, especially of Muslims in this country, as if there is no rule of law in this country, that mobs can just go and lynch somebody, sometimes on an allegation of possessing beef, sometimes on an allegation of being with a Hindu girl, and sometimes for no good reason at all except that he is a Muslim. So this is happening rampantly in the country, and unfortunately the judiciary, which has been tasked with the job of protecting our fundamental rights, protecting our democracy, protecting our constitution, has hardly risen to the occasion of their responsibilities. Once in a while they do rise. Recently, I mean, there is this Justice Oak in the Supreme Court and some other fine judges in the Supreme Court. It's not that there is no judge who is doing his duty. There are judges who are doing their duty. Day before yesterday, for example, Justice Oak gave a very fine, detailed judgment about while granting bail to this Imran Pratapgarhi, who was also imprisoned for some poem that he recited. That you cannot imprison people just because they have recited a poem that you don't like, or just because they do some comedy that you don't like, etc. That's part of the freedom of speech in our society. But by and large, we are seeing, because if you see how many people are still languishing in jail without trial, despite there being really no real evidence against them for having committed any crime. Take the Delhi riots. So many people. This young man, what's his name, Umar Khalid. Umar Khalid is just one example. There are so many people like him who are languishing in jail for the last five years without bail, without trial even having commenced. I mean, normally, if the trial doesn't commence for even 5 years, that's a perfect reason for granting bail. But unfortunately, the judiciary has failed us. In the case of Umar Khalid, in the case of many other young, fine activists against whom you cannot level any charge whatsoever. But they have been falsely accused, despite the fact that the Delhi courts have in several cases rapped the Delhi police on their knuckles for having conducted a dishonest investigation. But some of our frontline activists, some of our young activists are still in jail without bail, and that's indeed a failure not just of the police and the executive. Of course, the police is mainly to blame, but I am saying it's also a failure of the judiciary. So we are seeing this pattern rampant across the country, that this government, the central government and the BJP ruled state governments, are misusing their powers and their control over the police to falsely charge any activist, anybody who gives a speech or says anything that the government doesn't like, any political activist, any journalist who says something that the government doesn't like, put them in jail and charge them under these draconian. There are two very draconian laws in this country: the Prevention of Money Laundering Act and the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Among others, there is also the National Security Act, which allows preventive detention. Now, under these laws, the law as it is stated, it is not possible to get bail unless the judge declares that there is not even a prima facie case against the accused. Now, without the trial having been commenced, how can anybody declare that there is not even a prima facie case against the accused? And therefore, these people keep languishing in jail without the trial not having commenced for years altogether. This law has been challenged in various places, but again, it's a failure of the judiciary not to have struck down. In my view, this provision for bail is totally unconstitutional. It is against Article 21. How can you say that you can't grant bail unless the judge records a finding that there is no prima facie case against the accused? It's totally violative of our rights under Article 21. But unfortunately, these laws still stand, and unfortunately, the Supreme Court also has played a role in allowing these laws to remain, and sometimes even giving interpretations which strengthen the draconian nature of these laws. So, now what has happened to all these instances? The Election Commission. Election Commission was an institution created to ensure free and fair elections. Of course, there are other problems with our democracy also. We don't have direct democracy at all. We have first past the post at 2 levels, as a result of which only those people who have lots of money which they can use to advertise themselves and thus gain a lot of visibility, only those kind of parties and candidates seem to get elected in our flawed democratic system. But with whatever flaws, one right that people have been given is the right to vote once in 5 years during elections. But today what we are seeing is a rampant violation of our democratic rights and the stealing of our democracy by various means. Of course, there is a lot of doubts about the functioning of these EVMs, etc. I am not even going into that. Let us assume that the EVMs are not being manipulated on a very large scale, which a lot of people fear that they are. But there is rampant tampering with the electoral rolls, and this has been proved beyond any doubt, that the BJP gets bogus voters added to the electoral roll, sometimes 100 people on one address. 100 bogus people on one address, those are added to the electoral rolls, and the people who have voted against the BJP in the previous election, in those polling booths, there is large-scale deletion of voters. And all this is being allowed by our election commission, which has become totally partisan. The model code of conduct is not enforced against the ruling party and their ministers, etc. It is only enforced against the opposition. Dates for elections are declared only and totally on the basis of the convenience of the ruling party and not independently. Now, the Supreme Court, the Constitution bench of the Supreme Court recently declared that the appointments to the Election Commission cannot remain exclusively with the government. This is a great threat to democracy, because the government is one of the parties who is interested in the outcome of the elections. And therefore, the appointments should be controlled by a selection committee of Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition and Chief Justice. But unfortunately, the government brought a law to even change that and said that no, there is no need for the Chief Justice. We will have the Prime Minister, another minister nominated by the Prime Minister and the Leader of Opposition, which means that the government can steamroll anybody that they want. And that's what they have been doing, with the result that everybody now believes, from a time 30 years ago when everybody believed that the Election Commission was totally independent, today almost everybody believes that the Election Commission is not independent, completely under the control of the government. What has happened to the Comptroller and Auditor General? Comptroller and Auditor General is another institution created to ensure that public money is not spent unnecessarily or by corruption, etc. They are supposed to audit all government funds of public sector undertakings, various governments, etc. Now, what has happened in recent years is that the Comptroller and Auditor General has stopped auditing accounts of ruling party, of the BJP's governments, virtually stopped auditing, and is only auditing the accounts of the opposition states. And one easy, clear example of how the CAG has become totally a tool in the hands of the government is the audit of the Rafale purchases, the Rafale jet purchases. That was the only audit of defense in which the CAG removed the pricing details from the audit. The first and only audit in which pricing details have been removed from a defense audit. And how and why? So the game was given away when the government handed over a note in a sealed cover to the Supreme Court in a hearing which was going on, where we were seeking an independent investigation into the Rafale deal. Arun Shourie, Mr. Yashwant Sinha and I had filed a petition in the Supreme Court. And in that hearing, the government handed over a sealed cover to the Supreme Court, in which they said, falsely claimed, that number one, The CAG has completed the audit of this deal. Number two, this audit has been given to the Public Accounts Committee. Number three, this audit has also been made public. And number four, they said that the pricing details of these jets have been removed from this audit. Now, the first three statements were totally false because at that time when the sealed cover was given, no audit report had been prepared. It was prepared subsequently, and in that subsequent audit report, the pricing details were indeed removed. How did the government know that the pricing details from this CAG audit would be removed even before the audit had been done? Clearly, it showed that the CAG, or at least the head of the CAG, the controller and auditor, of course, the CAG is a very large organization. And in that large organization, there are many independent people. But the top of that organization is somebody who is totally controlled by this government. He is appointed exclusively by the government and he dances to the tune of this government. This business that, look, CAG's independence is secured by the government not having power to remove him unilaterally, etc., is a bogus argument. Unfortunately, in this country today, you can get any number of people who have skeletons in their cupboard and you can appoint them, and this government specializes in appointing those people who have skeletons in their cupboard through which the government can blackmail them into submission. Therefore, even when the government has no power to remove them, they just keep telling them that, look, we have this thing on you. The moment you say anything that we don't like or do anything that we don't like, we will arrest your wife, we will arrest your son, we will do this, that and the other. Therefore, the fact that the government does not have power to remove them does not necessarily guarantee the independence of these people if the power of appointment is exclusively with the government and the government selects such weak, blackmailable or ideologically committed people. This is what has been happening in most institutions in this country, and all institutions have been virtually destroyed, including the educational institutions like University Grants Commission, etc. Virtually all, including the parliament. Just see what is happening in parliament. Today we have a speaker and a vice president who are so totally partisan, not just partisan, absolute rogues. They are rogues. And they do not allow any discussion of in parliament which is not liked by the government. Absolutely something which was unimaginable some years earlier, today is happening in parliament, and parliament has been reduced to a joke where sometimes laws are passed, 30 laws are passed in one day without any discussion, without those laws being sent to the standing committee, etc., for being discussed at a wider level. Without any discussion in parliament, laws are being passed right, left and center. Media was supposed to be an independent institution, but today the mainstream media, if you see what is happening, the mainstream media has just become a mouthpiece and an instrument of this kind of ugly, vile, communal propaganda of this government. Abuse of the minority communities, everything is happening in this mainstream media.